Okay, well, good morning. Welcome to the 19th Annual Public Meeting of the Long-Term Plan for Achieving Water Quality Goals for the Everglades Protection Area Tributary Basins. I want to welcome everyone to the meeting. I'm Robert Chuford, lead scientist with the Ecosystem Restoration and Capital Projects Bureau. Today we have 7 presentations. They'll be very well updated on where we are in terms of our water quality efforts. We will have public comments at the end, so if you have specific questions regarding any of the presentations, I'll ask that you address your questions with the presenters, and their contact information will be on each slide at the very end of their presentation. Just for, and everyone here seems to be district oriented, but just for your situational awareness, to my left, the north side here, there's restrooms and cafeteria, and we just ask that you might bring drink, but please don't bring any food into the auditorium. With that, we will start with our first presentation. It's Mr. Jose Otero, and I will yield the floor to Mr. Otero.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning. My name is Jose Otero, Section Administrator with the Ecosystem Restoration and Capital Projects. We're going to do an overview of the last 3 seasons, starting with the dry season of 2021. The dry season is defined as the period between November through April, a 6-month period. And in this graph, in this slide, we see a map on the left with the rainfall depiction for the 6-month period, showing rainfall above average, still in the normal range, especially normal rainfall in the area in the Everglades agricultural area and to the north, in the Okeechobee watershed, in Lower Kissimmee Valley and the Upper Kissimmee Valley. Within that period, there were 2 extreme events, or 2 extreme monthly periods. The November 2020 period had an extreme amount of rainfall. It was associated with the arrival of Tropical Storm Eta in November. There were upwards of 500% amount of rainfall over the Conservation Area 3A. About 11 inches of rainfall fell in that area, and we'll see the effects of that later. And so everything from Everglades agricultural area to the south was extremely, extremely wet compared to the average, long-term average for November. In January, just 2 months later, January 2021, it was extremely, extremely dry, 18% of average. Every area was experiencing very dry conditions. Moving over to the wet season, this would be last year's wet season, the wet season of water year 2022. Again, a normal, within the normal range, below average, 91% of average. The areas in the EAA and Okeechobee watershed and Lower Kissimmee were average, a little drier elsewhere. There was a slow start for that wet season. May of 2021 had about 1.4 inches of rain. Normally a transition month like May has about 4 inches of rain. So it was a dry start to the wet season. There weren't really any specifically or particularly high months during this wet season, as you'll see in the response to the system. This July period of 2021 may be the one that was wetter. It was 111% of average. And some areas like the Lake Okeechobee watershed, the C-139 basin, and the C-51, or the Eastern Palm Beach County rainfall area, experienced above normal rainfall. And finally, the current season, the dry season of water year 2022 that started in November, and we're still currently in it. There's still 2 months left before the dry season of water year 2022 ends, so these are partial results. But so far, again, we're in the normal range, but within that normal range, there are drier amounts of rainfall in the EAA and to the north, and higher than average rainfall amounts to the south of the Everglades agricultural area. Again, this dry season, as the previous dry season, had a late start. It was relatively wet in November of 2021 with 3.7 inches of rain. Most areas had high amounts of rain, but in particular, the C-139 basin had very high amount of rain. And on the other end of the spectrum, December of 2021 had low amounts of rain, 41% of average. So now we're going to see two areas. We're going to look at two areas that reflect the response of the system to these amounts of rainfall that we just went through. So this graph is the Lake Okeechobee stage. It's separated into three boxes representing the dry season, wet season, and dry season of this current year that we just went through. So let's just review how the stage responded to those events. Here's the start of the dry season 2021 with some of that effect of the tropical storm Eta rainfall and the late start to the dry season with the November rainfall being above average. But after that, pretty much a very sustained and steady decline of rainfall. And then we enter the wet season of water year 2022, which is really the last year's wet season. Then again, a late start to that wet season. Dry conditions persisted through May, and the recession of the stage continued until it reached about 12.49 feet NGVD, just below the base flow band into the beneficial band. At that point, the wet season started, and there was a steady rise, as we indicated in the rainfall graph. There were no high, the stage didn't increase rapidly at any given point. It was a very steady rise given the fairly normal amount of rain. And finally, right after the end of the wet season into the dry season, there was still some remaining rainfall in November, so that high stage persisted. It even increased a little bit to 16.8 for the peak of that rise. And since then, it's been a steady decline because of the current conditions of this dry season, fairly dry so far, but a steady decline. This morning's stage is 14.59, just about a tenth of a foot below last week's, indicated in this graph. So another important, just to mention another second important area of the system immediately south of the Everglades agricultural area where the SDAs are located, we're going to see the response of that system. And as we indicated, the Conservation Area 3A received 11 inches of rain through Tropical Storm Eta, and this is the response that we see here in November of 2020, a rise of approximately 1 foot in a very short amount of time. And that is accompanied by releases through the S12 structures at the bottom end of Conservation Area 3A into the Everglades National Park. Those releases amounted to a peak of about 7,300 CFS. Those are very high releases, comparable to historic releases. This is the first time the combined operation plan actually went into effect for extreme high water line. And so that recession started after that rainfall period of November, and it was a steady decline, and also the outflows steadily declined as well. But the total outflow through the S12s was a total of 1.2 million acre feet from Conservation Area 3A to Everglades National Park. Again, we see, similarly to what we saw in Lake Okeechobee, a recession that persisted through the beginning of the wet season. And really, the lowest point was in June, reaching 8.43 in Zone B of the Combined Operation Plan. So the red line is really the bottom of zone A, and this straight line down here is the bottom of zone B. Again, with a normal amount of rainfall, there was a steady rise, but as soon as the stage crossed the line into zone A, there were releases that you can see down here. The red trace is the S12 releases, and the blue is S333. So that rise is controlled by those or managed by those releases. And again, a late start to the dry season, there's additional rainfall, but once those rains of November of 2021 stopped, then we see a very steady recession. This morning we're at or as of yesterday, we were at 9.31 and receding. So we've seen the rainfall and the response of the system in Lake Okeechobee and in Area 3A. So we're going to look now at the response of the inflows into the SDAs. So this graph breaks it down again for the 3 periods that we've been touching on. And the top bar shows the rainfall over the 5 source basins that are the primary source of water for the SDAs. C139 as the C51 West source basin, the Miami Canal source basin, the Hillsborough and Northern River source basin, and the West Palm Beach Canal source basin. Those are the 5 major source basins, and the amount of rainfall in this dry season of 2021 was 13.5 inches. The total inflow to the SDAs was 472,000 acre feet. Of that, 394 was due to runoff. That runoff, again, from the rainfall on the source basins, and 78,000 acre feet from lake regulatory releases. Moving over to the wet season of 2022, the rainfall amount was 36.8, almost 37 inches. And the total inflows to the SDA, 861,000 acre feet. Of that, 800,000 acre feet were due to direct runoff, again, very closely impacted by or as an effect of this direct rainfall onto the source basins. And 61,000 acre feet is the amount of water from lake regulatory releases. And finally, in the current dry season that we're in right now, so far 6.2 inches, a total inflow of 122,000 acre feet, and of that 102 from runoff and 20,000 acre feet from Lake Okeechobee regulatory releases. I'm going to transition to what the next presentation is going to focus on, which is the water years. And because the water quality is usually represented in water years, this is just a quick snapshot of what the 3 water years that are going to be touched on the next presentation look like. The water year 2020 had 44.9 inches of rain. That is below normal. And the total inflow into the SDAs was 987,000 acre feet. The last water year 2021 that ended in October of 2021, that ended in April of 2021, amounted to an inflow of 1.6 million acre feet, which was the second highest inflow into the SDAs on record. And of that, 1.4 million came from runoff. Again, this was an above normal rainfall year, water year 2021. And 162,000 came from Lake Okeechobee regulatory releases. And in the present partial water year, still 2 months to go to close to the water year 2022, we've had already 43 inches of rainfall below normal rainfall for a water year, a total of 983,000 acre feet in total into the SDAs. Of that, 902,000 came from runoff and 81 so far from Lake Okeechobee releases. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. This is his contact information if anyone wants to follow up with him with any questions. The next presentation will be Mr. Jacob Dombrowski, He's a senior scientist with the Applied Sciences Bureau, and I welcome you to the podium, Mr. Dombrowski.
All right, morning everyone. As Robert said, I'm Jake Dombrowski. I'm a senior scientist in the Water Quality Treatment Technology section of the Applied Sciences Bureau. So today I'll be giving an update on the performance of the Everglades stormwater treatment areas. Starting out with a quick introduction. So the map on the left shows the locations of the STAs, which are highlighted in the light green. So this presentation is primarily going to focus on performance. By that, I mean the flow volumes, TP loads, and the flow weighted mean concentrations. I might just say concentration at some point, but I'm always referring to the flow weighted means. So I'll go over yearly and monthly variation, as well as operational restrictions and construction projects that impacted operations. So just to orient you, a lot of these slides are going to look very similar. So on the top is a chart showing the TP concentrations at the inflows in red and outflows in blue, as well as the percent reduction in TP concentration. That's the black dots here. And then the table on the bottom has a lot of the same information, but also includes the TP loads as well. So throughout the presentation, I'll be showing water years 2020, 2021, and partial 2022. So this is data from May 1st through December 31st of 2021. So for SDA1 East, so far this water year, 1 East has received comparable flow volumes to water year 2020, although quite a bit less than 2021. And you'll notice that will be kind of a trend throughout the presentation. So Jose mentioned water year 2021 was a very wet year. For concentrations, the inflow concentration to 1 East is higher than 2020, but lower than 2021. And the outflow concentration follows a similar pattern. Overall, percent reduction in the TP concentration and load is either higher or comparable for water year 2022. Looking at the monthly data, so there's 3 charts here with flow on the bottom, TP load in the center, and TP concentration on the top. Inflows are still in red, outflows are still in blue. So looking at 1 East, a few highlights. So in November 2020, we had Tropical Storm Eta, which brought some fairly high TP loads to SDA1 East. And as a result, we saw a bit of an uptick in the outflow concentration for 1 East. But outside of that, 1 East has had fairly stable and fairly low outflow concentrations for these reported years. Looking at operational restrictions, so these will include construction projects or migratory bird nesting, things like that that impact the operations of the STA. And I'm just going to mention them as they relate to operations. Presentations later on this morning will go into more detail on them. So for 1 East, this year, the Western Flowway is offline for restoration strategies, earthwork projects in cells 5 and 7, as well as a refurbishment project in cell 6. Outside of that, there were periodic restrictions in the central flowway for vegetation management. There was some migratory bird nesting, but that was in sections that were offline, so no impact to operations. The photo on the bottom left here shows some of the earthwork in cells 5 and 7, which is near completion. And then the photo on the right is some great submerged vegetation communities in cell 2 of the Eastern Flowway. Moving on to 1 West. So you'll notice SDA1 West has received very low inflow volumes this year, significantly lower than the previous 2 years. And that's due to a lot of ongoing projects in the STA that I'll go over in a few slides. So outside of that, the TP concentrations for 1 West, the inflow is higher than 2020 so far this water year, but lower than 2021. And the outflow concentration for 1 West is lower than both previous years. The percent reduction in TP concentration and load is higher this year for 1 West. I should also mention too, the 1 West expansion number 1 is complete and operational, and so data from that is included in the presentation here. Looking at the monthly trends, so similar to 1 East, SDA1 West saw a pretty big impact from Tropical Storm Eta, not so much in the flows, but higher loads and much higher concentrations coming into the STA. You'll also note there's a few blank spots here for SDA1 West. So these were months where there was either negligible or no flows or loads coming in or out of the STA. Outside of that, the outflow concentration for 1 West has been lower, not quite as low as 1 East, but in recent months, so in water year 2022, the outflow concentration has been stable and in the low range. For operational restrictions, all flowways in 1 West were online this year, but there were periodic restrictions in each of them. So these were primarily related to refurbishment earthwork projects in each of the flowways, as well as blackneck stilt nesting in each of the flowways. There was also a construction project related to Cell 8, or in Cell 8, related to expansion number 2 for SDA1 West. So the photo on the bottom left here shows one of the blackneck stilt nests, and then the photo on the right is some of the earthwork projects in Cell 3 of the Eastern Flowway. Moving on to SDA2. So far this water year, SDA2 has had higher inflow volumes than water year 2020, but not quite as high as 2021. The inflow concentration, pretty comparable to the previous 2 years, a little higher than 2020, a little lower than 2021. And the outflow concentration for 2022 is very low this year at 15. Overall, percent reduction in TP concentrations and loads for SDA2 is high so far this water year. Looking at the monthly trends, so you'll note SDA2 is a little bit less variable for the inflow concentrations coming to the STA, and especially when you're looking at the outflow concentrations. So outflow concentrations have been very low and very stable for this reporting period. Also noticed not quite as much of an impact from Tropical Storm Eta for SDA2 this year, or in water year 2021. In terms of operational restrictions, Flowway 2 is currently offline for an earthwork project. Outside of that, there were periodic restrictions in the other flowways, primarily related to vegetation management activities. There was also a construction project in Cell 3, which is highlighted in this picture here on the right. So this was trying to improve hydraulic efficiency through some high spots in the cell. There was also some migratory bird nesting, although generally in areas that do not impact operations. So I mostly just wanted to include this great photo by one of our wildlife biologists of the least tern nesting that occurs within the STA2 footprint, but not quite in the marsh. So STA 3-4, so far this water year, 3-4 has received slightly higher inflow volumes than 2020, but not quite as high as 2021. Looking at the inflow concentrations and outflow, both of these are elevated compared to the 2 prior years. So the A1 FEB, which generally benefits STA 3-4 a great deal, had a lot of nesting this past wet season. So our operations there were pretty limited, and it didn't. STA 3-4 did not benefit quite as much as it usually does. Looking at the monthly trends, the one big highlight from 3-4 is generally the very low variability in terms of inflow and outflow concentrations. So inflow, you'll see a little bit of jumps around, but for the most part, it's very stable. And the outflow concentration has remained stable for many years in the very low range. It's also worth noting there were a few high flow events in August 2019, and then around the Tropical Storm Eta time in water year 2021. For operational restrictions, the eastern flowway is currently offline for vegetation rehabilitation. This is being done through a planned drawdown. The photo on the right highlights this. You might be able to make out a lot of this looks very bare. It's actually full of thousands of little plantings that are going to fill that area in. So outside of the eastern flowway being offline, the western and central both had periodic restrictions for vegetation management. The photos here, center shows some of our great mixed marsh communities in Cell 2B. And then the photo on the left is just one of the snail kites that was taken near the A1 FEB. Moving on to SDA 5.6. So far, SDA 5.6 has had a wet year, receiving higher inflow volumes than both previous years. The inflow concentration is between the previous 2 years, so higher than 2020, lower than 2021. But the outflow concentration for 5.6 is lower so far this water year compared to the previous 2. And the percent reduction in TP concentrations and loads is higher so far this year. Looking at the monthly trends, a couple things will stick out. So you'll see Tropical Storm Eta here in the center, very, very high TP loads coming into the STAs, creating very high inflow concentrations nearing 500 parts per billion, some of the highest we've seen in the Everglades STAs. The other big takeaway for 5.6 are these periodic dry-out conditions that we see in the dry season, where the STA receives very little flows and loads. And it's typically followed by a bit of a spike in TP concentration when the STA is rehydrated. But to end on a good note, so far in water year 2022, STA 5.6 has had fairly low outflow concentrations compared to its period of record. For operational restrictions, all flowways for 5.6 were online this year. There were periodic restrictions in flowways 2 and 3 related to the Restoration Strategies earthwork project there. So that was completed a few years ago, and the photo on the left highlights that. But a lot of those areas were taken down to bare ground, so they needed some time to grow some vegetation back in. So both those flowways are completely operational now. Aside from that, the flowways 3 and 6 had blackneck stilt nesting. And then the photo on the right here just highlights some of the great SAV coverage in flowway 1 in the B cell. All right, so this is my last slide. It's a comparison between the individual STAs. So these top 3 charts show STAs compared against each other for each of the 3 years. And then the table on the bottom combines that data together for all the STAs and compares them between the few different years. So big takeaways so far in water year 2022, the STAs received pretty comparable levels of inflow volumes to all of water year 2020, but nowhere near the levels we've seen in 2021. Inflow concentrations are either comparable or slightly higher than previous years, but the outflow concentration has been on the low side. Percent reduction in TP concentration and load is higher for 2022, but I do want to point out, as Jose mentioned, water year 2021 was one of our wettest years on record, the second highest inflow volumes the STAs received. And although the percent reduction of TP load might not look that high, the actual metric tons of TP being retained in the STA was near record as well. And that's it for me. This is my contact information if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jake. Great presentation. So we've actually seen the source water, and we've actually seen the production within the SDAs. We're going to move into the next presentation, which talks specifically about the management of these SDAs and the vegetation that drives a lot of the activity. So the next presentation will be from Mr. Eric Crawford, a senior scientist with the Land Resources Bureau. and he'll speak about vegetation management.
All right, thanks, Robert. I'm gonna try to do a quick overview of vegetation management activities in the SDAs the last couple of years. Do a brief overview of what we do, why we do it, and then a couple of shots of some specific locations where we've done some bigger projects trying to either fix things or bring on new land. So our objective with the vegetation management is to maintain the vegetation so that we can keep the phosphorus uptake process rolling. We try to enhance the vegetation that's already there. We plant plantings where it's bare, and we use selective management to remove unwanted plants and to increase the populations of our desirable plants. So the way the vegetation functions and what makes a plant either desirable or not is its ability to either stabilize the soils, create flow patterns, decrease turbidity, create litter that can help establish the microbial phosphorus uptake processes. Most of that comes from the emergent vegetation, the rooted, stronger, upright plants that are more of a physical barrier to the water flow and cause a balance in the flow patterns. The submerged aquatic vegetation gives us water column nutrient uptake and provides a periphyton substrate that does the real fine polishing. And the pictures show some fresh emergent plantings and the crew harvesting SAV for transplant from a dense, successful area to a bare area. So this shot shows what a young, healthy, emergent vegetation stand looks like, and the inset shows a more mature stand. You see in the larger picture is a number of species. Those would be planted in order to get a deep root mass and to balance the flow patterns, close off short circuits, and establish controlled areas where the cattail can then come in and grow quickly and be stable. And this is what highly stressed vegetation looks like. Sometimes it's hard to tell because it's still green, but you'll notice there's a lot of invasive species in there. If you look in closely, a lot of those plants are floating. Those floating mats provide very little in the way of phosphorus uptake. And they're also mobile, which means they increase turbidity and they can mow over areas of healthy vegetation and damage them. So we try to remove those areas and try and get it back to a more stable population. When we talk about stable populations, we need stable populations of desirable plants that will be sustainable, things that can withstand high water flows or periods of low water and the fluctuations in between. The undesirable plants are either natives or invasive plants that tend to float, can become mobile, or don't provide much in the way of phosphorus uptake. So a big part of the management out there is the invasive species control. This is Florida, and almost anything can live here and wants to. And invasive species can overrun the SDAs, and most of them don't perform well. So a big effort goes into keeping them out. And we also don't want to allow them to pass through the SDAs to our downstream partners. We control them with a mixture of herbicides, mechanical controls, tough booms, and we've taken to put in dense native plantings at the inflows and outflows. Sometimes we shape the plantings in areas where we get heavy inflows to corral that FAV into areas where it can be treated. Then we found a few different species and mixtures where we can sort of corral the invasives into places where the natives are stronger and can withstand the control methods. The FAV these last 2 years has just been crazy. We get lots of floating aquatic vegetation coming through, lots of the water hyacinth, the Nymphoides cristata, the water lettuce. Those are the worst three, and they come flowing into the SDAs. You can see it in the picture here, even invading all through. That can form dense rafts that then get mobilized by flow or wind, which can then knock over the emergent vegetation, and they shade out and can uproot the submerged vegetation. So again, we plant the dense strips of strong emergent vegetation at the front ends to try and hold that FAV back. We try to keep it from ever reaching the submerged cells and from getting to the downstream cells. So in order to sort of prioritize how we use our resources for the management, we have to do kind of a constant vegetation monitoring. We're out there weekly on the ground, monthly in the air, and then we get out inside the cells when necessary to get a better look to see what's going on. We work with the water managers to control stages and flow rates, redirect flows to where the plants are stronger and away from where there's rafts of mobile invasives that need to be controlled before we can put the water through that area. And then we try to proactively get in and do plantings where we think it's going to be necessary. We really don't want to wait until there's a short circuit. The longer a short circuit's in place, the more scouring happens, the deeper it becomes, and the harder it gets to stop it and hold the water away from it. So we try to get in as early as possible and get the repairs started before they're necessary. So there's a lot of steps in the rehabilitation in the emergent plants. That picture on top, at first glance, there's a lot of green and it looks good, but almost everything in that picture is wrong. It's mostly invasive species, and about 80% of that is floating. That's an area that completely failed. The soil delaminated, the plants floated, it became mobile and ran over areas of good plants. The little picture on the bottom is the same area after we drew it down, removed the invasives, and that crew is in there filling that area with giant bulrush in this case to quickly rehab it and get it back into operations. This machine is something we developed just this last year, or these last 2 years. We got together with the company that has this aquatic excavator. It can float, or it can run through the marsh. It has a little less than a pound of pressure per square foot on those tracks, so there's no soil compaction. On the front end is it's a hydraulic rototiller. And we use that to grind the dead floating vegetation and stir up and grind the floating soils when the soils have delaminated. It does a couple things. It breaks it into smaller pieces, allows it to sink, and it aerates it while it happens, so decomposition speeds up. Probably not something you want to do during flows, but when we're stagnant and we can drop the levels, it really speeds up the recovery of the emergent plants and allows us to get plantings done more quickly than we could otherwise. So it usually takes 3 to 4 years to rot out those floating mats, and this way we can get it done in a couple of months. So it's one of the experiments that paid off. This is SDA2 Cell 1A. I'm going to show a little time-lapse picture that'll show, I don't know if you could see the numbers in the top, starting in 2017 with its SDA2 Cell 1A, starting to have problems. We have a lot of invasive inputs, and I've manipulated the RGB values in the picture to make the water lettuce pop. That's one of the things I was tracking when I started doing this. And you can see the damage and the degradation move from the inflow areas down towards the outflow. Now cell 1B, the cell directly downstream of this, is a great performer and a really healthy cell. And we got to the point where we were afraid that we were going to start affecting 1B's performance. So at that point, this flowway was drawn down. We put the grinding machine in and started removing the invasives. So you can see there's a central slough going east to west across the cell. And you'll notice over the years, we're into 2018 now, it starts to enlarge, it changes shape. The borders of it become floating and they become mobile. The FAV is now almost to the outflows. So we had crews working full time, just trying to keep it from getting to 1B. And then here you can see the changes, the drawdown. At this point, the machine's in there and we started grinding some of the floating mats, treating out all the invasives. And now we're in kind of the grow-in period, trying to shrink that slough and bring the plants into it. And this is where we are as of about 2 weeks ago. You can see we've pushed the slough to the north, and the brown areas are healthier cattails to the south. So trying to give 1B more of a buffer to keep the performance possibilities up there. And so far it's working well. The areas that were ground have revegetated nicely. We've still got more work to do. We've done about 350 acres that we've rehabbed with the machine in that cell. So about 10% of the cell we've worked over. That was emergent control. We do a lot of SAV inoculation as well. In past years, we did a lot more than we do now, but we still do it where it's needed. It's kind of labor intensive. We go out and we harvest SAV from within SDA cells and move it to places where it's either bare or we have monocultures. And so we mix the species, we mix populations, we try to maintain the genetic diversity and try to keep, fill any empty spots that we have. So part of the SAV management we've found is that smaller compartments of SAV perform much better and are much more stable to seasonal perturbations and physical problems and wildlife and just flow-related issues and wind. By planting more emergence in with the SAV and compartmentalizing the SAV into smaller, more diverse compartments, we're able to keep it going year round. We get less dry season die-off. As the species rise and fall, hopefully we've got enough diversity that another species fills the space. So SDA2 Cell 3 had kind of a similar story to 1A of 3-4, except in this cell it was mostly SAV and we lost the SAV over time. And when the problems got to the bottom end of the cell to where it was affecting the outflows, we drew the cell down and tried to go in and fix the short circuiting, block the flow pattern where it was wrong. There was construction done to increase flow across remnant roads that were constricting the flow inside the cell. And we moved SAV populations around throughout the cell. And this time lapse will show the changes in the cell as the FAV or in the SAV gets lost. You see turbidity plumes that pop up and areas of the cell become turbid, and some of them stay turbid almost year round. With the loss of the SAV, we had high fish populations come in, and they made it really difficult to reestablish the SAV. So you can see the new veg strips forming. We're subdividing all the compartments. And as the compartments get subdivided and the veg strips become more mature, the SAV starts to recover. And if you're watching on cell 2, just to the right, you can see the construction project in there to level and fill that cell as well. So this is where we're at right now. In this cell, where we're probably ready to start bringing the water levels back up. What looks, change the pointer back. Down here, a lot of this, some of this is dry, but a lot of this white is actually topped out Cara that's above the water level. So it's still good. It's just the parts that are above the water level become sun bleached. The stages in there are artificially low right now to help these veg strips thicken up and come back. And they're coming back really nicely now. Stem densities are about double what they were this time last year. So those strips should be thicker and stronger next year. And that's it for today. There's my contacts if there's any questions.
So the presentations have been great thus far. If you realize we've talked about water coming in, we've talked about performance, and we've talked about how vegetation, which is the heartbeat of these water management areas or these man-made wetlands, help to do the work that we're all looking forward to, the water, achieve the water quality goals that we're pursuing. This next presentation is going to deal specifically with the many types of research that is going on in these systems. And that's going to be presented by Dr. Tom James, who is a principal scientist with the Applied Sciences Bureau. And Dr. James, I yield the floor to you.
Okay. Let's see how this works. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to let you know I am the coordinator for the Restoration Strategy Science Plan, and this is actually my, I'm at 3.5 years now in this position, and this is I think my 4th presentation of this particular project, or of the restoration strategy. So there's a lot of details going on, a lot of things are going on. These slides are summaries of what's going on, and I'm going to basically be summarizing the summaries. And let's see here. Oh, here we go. First, I do want to acknowledge the fact that I'm basically the messenger here, and that all of the work that's been done has been done by district scientists, technicians, engineers, planners. There's definitely procurement is involved. And then we have a lot of contractors and their staff as well. So when I say I or me, I actually mean they, or sometimes it's we. So the science plan itself has been in 2 parts. We started in 2013, and the reason was it was required by Restoration Strategies, the Restoration Strategies plan, and by SDA permits and consent orders. So far, we've developed this framework, which has allowed 21 studies to be produced. 8 have been completed, and 13 are underway. And essentially, it's to evaluate key, and of course, pardon some typos here, evaluate key removal in the STAs of phosphorus, and to support processes that affect phosphorus P operation and management of STAs to achieve the Q-Bell. I do want to say that I'll be using a few jargon terms. We've heard EAV, of course, and SAV. I will talk about the Q-Bell, which is the water quality-based effluent limit, also FEBs, which are the flow equalization basins, and I'm sure there are a few others. So the areas of investigation within this particular project have been essentially 6 areas and 6 questions, looking at FEB and STA design and operation, looking at improvement of vegetation, which is a main portion of this, internal loading of phosphorus, which essentially comes from the soils, biogeochemical and physical mechanisms, and finally the role of fauna. I won't go into detail on this particular slide. These are some of the studies that have been completed. There have been 8 studies again completed. Here are 6 of them. I want to point out, however, this one study on the periphyton-based stormwater treatment area, PASTA technology, performance design, and operation factors. You'll note that all of our titles are very long. They just happen to be that. And within these parentheses, we've actually created some nicknames or short titles. And I'll be referring to each one of the studies by their short titles. But I do want to talk to you for a moment about this PASTA study. We have completed the study, but we continue to monitor the inflow and the outflow. And this particular study has, in the last 14 years, it basically is, they've removed the soils, the muck soils from down to limestone. And in the past 14 years, we've met the flow-weighted mean discharge of TP of 13 parts per billion, which meets the Q-Bell. And this is a very important tool for our toolbox. Here are some other studies that have completed recently. The most recent is a Cattail Sustainability study. I want to point out that in the South Florida Environmental Report, which is coming out tomorrow for this particular past year, there will be an appendix to Chapter 5C, looking at this Cattail study and basically an overview of what's going on. But essentially, it shows that Cattail, they are very plastic, but they do show stress when the water levels get fairly high for very long. So the ongoing studies, here's the list. I'm going to be talking about these in a little bit more detail, though essentially I'll be giving you an overview of the overview in each study. If you care to go back to the information, we have some information that's on our website, which I will show you at the end. And there's also the information you can gain from these particular slides as well. Most recently, in the past year, we've put 4 more studies together. So we've had a total of 21. We've got 13 ongoing, and we don't expect to have any more to begin, because we plan to essentially complete all of these studies by 2024, which is when the Restoration Strategy Science Plan is to end. So the next slides are going to be for each particular study individually, and they'll look very much like this. Again, I won't get into all the details because there's too many moving parts, but I will talk to you a little bit about what's behind each study. So for the soil, of course, is a very important portion because it does provide some phosphorus loading, and we've created a lot of the STAs on agricultural land, which has been, it has lots of fertilizer on it. And what can we do to reduce that? Well, we took a couple of different aspects or points. The first thing, and most of the studies do this, either have a literature survey or look at data mining. For this one, they looked at the amendment technologies and looked at all the literature, and it basically shows that They can be effective, but we're unsure how they'd affect the Everglades, and they'd also be very expensive. So we tabled that and looked at another piece, which is looking at soil inversion or tilling. And essentially, flipping the soil would essentially take the topsoils, which are phosphorus loaded from the agricultural fertilization, and move them underneath, and the soils underneath, of course, lower phosphorus, to allow us to begin working toward a cell that provides conditions that can be lower phosphorus coming from the soils in better phosphorus conditions so that we can start operations quicker. And of course, with all of the studies, when you dealing in the field, things never go the way they planned. This particular set of cells were actually flooded over 2 years ago and only began operation last July. And we have 2 cells, one that was tilled, one that wasn't. And these particular cells, they're not the same in terms of their operations. And so the results are equivocal, but we move forward to see what's going to happen in the future. And you can see that we've got some SAB in cell 8, which is the untilled cell, which is greater than cell 7, and TIFA, which is greater in cell 7 than in cell 8. And we'll continue working on that in the future. One of the interesting things that, of course, that Eric brought out was, these cattails, and they have a problem in that they create some floating wetlands. And we're real concerned about that because they do cause problems with these floating masses moving around and basically messing up the STAs, also causing some short circuiting and also blocking a lot of the structures. So what can we do about them? One is we looked again to look at the background and try to figure out, well, what are the potential reasons that they do occur? And we looked at that in terms of predictions. And also we said, well, is there a way that we can rapidly find them over time? And we started working with our contractor, which you see here, using an unmanned aerial vehicle equipped with a multispectral scanner. And essentially this could rapidly survey the regions and find where those tussocks are, and we can deal with them with that marsh master that Eric was showing them. So this continues. We're almost completed with this. We are also looking at a buoyancy model for development, which will tell us what's the probability of an area to have a TIFA wetland pop up. Another species, of course, is the SAV, and this is the second part of our triumvirate of plants that work to remove phosphorus. And one of the things that we've noticed in the past is that we have these lush SAV lawns, essentially, and all of a sudden they disappear. Sometimes we know the answer to that, hurricanes or droughts or floods, but others, they just disappear. So the question is here, what's happening? So a lot of factors were looked at in terms of looking at the literature. Again, different things were looked at: phosphorus loading, soil type, water depth, etc. And one of the things that we've been doing for the last 2.5 years is using these mesocosms and changing the loading rate and changing the different soils and looking at the effect on SAV. What's interesting here is that, again, with systems in the field, you have an expectation of something to occur. And in this case, it hasn't occurred yet. We're expecting this SAV to collapse, and it's been 2.5 years, it hasn't. So we continue and do some manipulations back and forth. But essentially, we've looked at different phosphorus concentrations, We looked at different soil types, and we're getting lots of information from this, and the P-load experiments continue through the next year. One of the big contenders to the system that causes some concern is the fauna, basically fish. And what I wanted to point out here, here's tilapia, and these are tilapia nests within one of the STAs. And as you can see, they've created a whole bulk of nests and have actually disturbed all the soils and also the vegetation as well. And so the question is, well, what is their impact? And how do we tell? Well, one of the things that we do know is that STAs are very good fishing areas. So we'd like to encourage fishing out there. And there's a lot of fauna. It's a lot higher than in the Everglades. And there's a couple of ways that fish can affect the phosphorus in the water column. One is through this bioturbation, where they, again, essentially dig into the soils. Another is by eating the plants. And a third is essentially by excretion. And one of the interesting things with this is that we found that the excretion rates are about the same as the loading rate. So the material is being turned over at the same rate as it's being loaded into the system. We're also looking at calibration of electrofishing, which is a way we measure the fish, the big fish, and it happens that the exotic fish that occur in these STAs, they tend to be immune to electrofishing. So we're going out and trying to do a calibration study where we'll take an area, block it off, put some fish in, do an electrofishing, and count how many we got versus how many we put in, which will help us in terms of our counts. The third vegetation species or vegetation group that we're interested in is the periphyton study. And essentially, we know a little bit about this, but we don't know all of the processes that go this. This is the microbial and algal component that exists within the STAs and attaches to the plants and actually can cause lots of changes in the phosphorus within the water column, changing from organic to inorganic and then back to particulate, et cetera. So we're doing a couple of different studies to this. One is the bioavailability study, which essentially took some of the periphyton, put it into a jar, and incubated it using filtered water from the STAs. And of course, this particular study, again, this happens with field as well as laboratory studies, the periphyton died. And despite that death, we did see some slight reductions in the phosphorus and how it changed. And we're doing a second study, and that one was more successful. And we're also doing some DNA work, some metagenomics, to do a snapshot of the community to see, one, what's there in terms of actually doing some species, as well as get some ideas of what phosphorus genes are turned on. And that can give us an idea of what is being transformed within the water column. When we were updating the 2018 Restoration Strategy Science Plan, this was water year 2018, in the L8, which is an FEB, we found that there was the water quality, the TP concentrations coming out of the FEB were greater than coming in. So the question is, where is that coming from? So this particular study, the L8 FEB study, was to look at that. And we looked at groundwater, we looked at the resuspension of materials, and also runoff from embankments. And we find that the materials that really contributed to the loadings were the large inflows, which basically have resuspended the materials from the soils in the bottom of these FEBs. And as long as we don't have a lot of water being flowing in and a lot of flowing out in a few weeks' time later, then the material settles down and the phosphorus levels are the same or less in the discharge. So monitoring continues, and we have another study we're looking at to take advantage of leverage the FEB is to do an alum injection study, and that's a feasibility study underway to see if we can't reduce the phosphorus even more through just simply adding alum, which is a chemical that is used in lakes to reduce phosphorus. So how do we pull an understanding of where all of this phosphorus is coming from, going to, and what are the major contributors over time within the STAs? One approach is the biomarker study, and what this does, it uses a number of very sophisticated organic marking methods, such as mass spectrometry, spectrophotometry, there's X-ray diffraction, as well as looking at isotopes. And the concept here is essentially to look in different areas what the different materials are and where they might be coming from, where they might be going to. And some of the interesting things that have come from this is the concept of photodegradation, areas where you're getting lots of sunlight and lots of water. The dissolved organic material does transform due to sunlight. And we're looking at that and looking to see exactly what's going on with those. One of the other things we're doing is a decomposition study, and that's being worked through to look to see, again, where all this material is coming from and going to. This will continue through this coming year, and we're actually going to be doing some transect sampling, where again, we'll look at different spots along a transect within the STAs to see what the changes are in the organics of the phosphorus and give us an idea of what the transformations are within the STAs. The P-dynamic study, one of the things that we discovered with the P-flux study, which was a previous study which looked at all of the biogeochemistry under different flow conditions in the well-performing flowways. We took that and said, well, what's happening in the not so well-performing flowways? And this took all of the information from the P-flux study and the methods that they used to evaluate this. And essentially, the easiest thing to do is to monitor the water quality, the vegetation, and soils all together under the different flow regimes for different STA flowways. And this one's ongoing right now. Another aspect is with the SAV is how they sequester phosphorus within the STAs. And what happens is when the SAV photosynthesize, they basically remove carbon from the water column. That changes the chemistry, which actually increases the pH. And calcium essentially binds with some other carbon to create some precipitates. That precipitate essentially pulls phosphorus from the water column into the soils, and it creates this material called marl. And this particular material is very flocculent, and you can see here it comes back up, and the soils are essentially looking at different areas. This particular study looked at marl in different areas and chose a particular marl to look at some methods to actually amend the soil with organics to see if that amendment in drying would support reduction of this resuspension and more stable soils. That's being done with 3 different types of amendments: cattail leaves, sugarcane, and humics. With the vegetation overall in these STAs, the question comes to, are there any communities of SAV that give us better removal of phosphorus. This is where the ecotope study comes in. And essentially, we took some common ecotopes or communities that are found in the STAs, and we're looking at the flow of water through them and the flow of phosphorus to see which one is actually removing more phosphorus and changing it to show what things that might be useful in the future. And right now we're still sampling, and hopefully that will continue and will provide some meaningful results. One aspect that's been kind of on our back burner for years is this advection study, the seepage, positive seepage into the STAs. When that water moves through the soils, it probably pulls or pushes some dissolved organic or dissolved phosphorus into the water column. The question is that a significant amount enough to affect the overall water quality of the water column in the STAs? And we're working on this. It's actually just started. As of Friday, we had our kickoff meeting to look at phase one, which is, again, like all of these studies, a literature review and a historical analysis of the data. And we're going to look at a simple model including seepage to see what conditions will it occur that the positive seepage would have an impact on water quality in the STAs. The landscape study, this one we're still working on. Essentially, one of the things that we want to do is we want to get the flows right, and essentially to provide a condition where we get the best mixing of the water and the phosphorus that's coming into the STAs. Just mix it throughout the STA flowway as best we can without causing damage to the plants themselves. So this one is just started. We're looking at possible plans and methodologies, essentially doing some work to create a couple of flumes in one of our cells in the test cells in the STA. And we're still working on that at the moment. And finally, there's the data integration study. This is my bailiwick. This is my piece of the pie. And essentially, it's looking at all the puzzle pieces of all of these different studies and all of the monitoring data that we've collected over the past 20 years and trying to put them together to give us an overall guidance document of what we can do to improve the performance of the STAs to actually reach the QBEL. And we've already done a lot of work. This has just started. We had a microbial literature review. We've analyzed the soil, the outflow soil, water, and plants. And we have looked at compiling the period of record data for the STAs. And this includes like 84 different water quality parameters and hydrologic parameters. And we're also working on a fairly complicated biogeochemical model just to give us an idea of what are the interactions and how those interactions within the STAs affect the water quality and which ones are the most important. So we're working on this biogeochemical model. We also have a food web that's being developed. And in the future, we'll be developing some guidance documents. So again, we have 21 studies. A lot of them have been completed, and we expect a lot to be completed this particular year. You see there's a lot that are going to be completed at the end of this year or anticipated to be completed. And we move forward into 2024 with data integration being the last study that will be presented. I do want to show you that we do have information available on all of these studies in the science plan, as well as tomorrow is when the SFER for 2020, water year 2021 will be published. And In Chapter 5C, we have a lot of this information, plus more details that you might want to look for. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James. It's a great presentation. So we've gotten a lot of information thus far. The next presentation that comes up is dealing specifically with a lot of the construction and a lot of the engineering activities that not only help to keep these man-made marshes functional, but also to keep them viable. And so I'll bring before you Ms. Lucinda Dadrian. She is the Project Management and Section Administrator for Engineering and Construction Bureau. And she's going to talk a little bit about the restoration strategies and the updates. So, Ms. Dadrian. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present almost a decade of work in design and construction, based on a big team of moving and completing works and reviewing and moving through projects. So as everyone knows, Restoration Strategies is in 3 flow paths: Eastern, Central, and Western. We've completed a good portion of this work to date. As you can see on the left, we've completed a lot of projects, including most recently G341 Segment 4 has been completed. And we have ongoing construction projects in 1 East, which is substantially complete. Expansion 2 is in construction, 139 FEB. And we're out for bids on Segment 5 of G341 conveyance in the Bowles Canal. So as I mentioned, 1 East is in substantial completion. This was to raise and regrade the cells in the western flow path in cells 7 and 5. As you can see, this aerial shows how the work has been completed. We've actually completed the planting in cell 5, and we've moved on to cell 7. And we'll complete the planting pretty soon. So 1 West expansion number 2, this takes flows from the SDA1 West, was required to separate flows going to the expansion 1 and expansion 2. Takes inflows from S5A and C51, and the outflow is to conservation area 1. We've split this out into many packages and have completed some of the work. So the underground piping was complete, and the STA and connector canal is currently in construction. Started back in September 2020 and is currently 55% complete. We have the inflow and outflow pump stations, 3 of them started in November 2020, which are 30 and 20% complete, respectively. So our consent order milestone is December 2022, and we're working towards meeting that goal. Here are some pictures in construction. So on the left, we have the north inflow canal and levee. Includes the inflow canal, the levee, the seepage berm, or seepage canal, and berm to the bottom of the picture. And on the right, this is the north end of the concrete conveyance channel. As you can see here, this is in construction. Here are some pictures of the pump stations coming out of the ground. These are very large construction projects. We're building the pier walls for the intake bays, and then after this, we'll start forming and pouring concrete. These are big pours. On the left, again, at G782 is the outflow pump station. Rebar placement on the right. We are pouring concrete for the slab. This is usually nighttime work. So moving on to the Bowles Canal, which is part of G341 related conveyance improvements. We analyzed and modeled the improvements and determined that the Bowles Canal is the feature that needed improvements. We've completed 4 out of the 5 segments to date. We've completed 3 bridges and have 2 left. So what's out to bid is segment 5. It's about 1 mile or just about a mile or more, plus 2 bridges that need to be replaced and to open up that conveyance. And this will be our last construction project for Restoration Strategies. Here are some pictures of segment 4 to show you how small that conveyance channel was. And then the bridge construction of Okeechobee, opening up that cross-section. And then on the right, you'll see the completed work of the bridge. And then an aerial showing you how the improvements are shown and how much we've opened up the canal. And this is to create a 600 CFS canal to move water east and west as opportunities arise. So the next project, this is in the Western Flow Basin, C139 FEB, takes inflows from 139 Basin. It's adjacent to SDA2 and south of it, we have C139 Annex, which is a separate construction contract and not part of our restoration strategies. So here's a depiction of how the water comes in through an inflow pump station, comes around this levee, which reduces the fetch and lowers our levee embankments, and out an inflow structure back into the L3 canal to be pulled back into SDA2 and hydrate 5/6. So overall, we're 28% complete, our pump station 75% complete, and our outflow structure 45% complete. Moving and grooving on everything land leveling, levee, and canal construction. As you can see here, we have a western perimeter levee and seepage canal. And then on the right, we have, this is this structure reinforcement rebar that's being placed in the outflow structure. Or no, that's the pump station, sorry. Yep, that was the outflow structure. So G550 pump station, we are excavating the foundation. This is the cofferdam, dewatered, and excavation is occurring. We're also excavating the western seepage canal on the right. So to supplement restoration strategies, we picked a series of projects with our great scientists to determine what, in addition, could we do to support restoration strategies. So in SDA1 East, Western Cell, below the cells 5 and 7 work that we did, there was a remnant berm that created issues with effective STA area. And so we had a project that degraded that berm, as you can see on the left, multiple cuts degrading that berm and allowing the flow to sheet flow across the cell. This work was completed back in January 2021 using a floating excavator. So pretty neat construction. SDA1 West, in concert with the work we're doing that we completed in expansion 1 and we're in construction in expansion 2, we needed to improve SDA1 West. So the original construction was a smaller cell, and then later was added onto, and with that it created levees or cells in weird shapes that created not as effective treatment in these cells. So we've removed the levee and we created a new levee, and this creates sheet flow east to west without any dead zones. We are backfilling a remnant canal, and this canal is 50% complete. We're removing a levee to create a more efficient cell size, and that includes removal of old structures that we no longer have to replace. And we've also regraded finger canals that move north to south, and planting is complete. So another big project is the SDA2 Cell 2. We have some deeper zones in this cell that we have brought in fill, and we're also regrading, and this work is 90% complete. in this section. And then this work is 15% complete in the larger cell here. So some future work after this work is done is to create or recreate some burrow canal plugs and restore them. Total of 49, so this work will happen in the dry season of 2023. So like I said, we're on our last package to get out the door for construction, which is pretty amazing. We're excited. It's been a long haul and looking to make it to the end. Thank you.
Okay, so obviously, there's a lot of activity that's still going on, but we're getting closer and closer to its completion, which is ideal. So this next presentation, we're moving into a slightly different area. It's dealing a little more with source control. And what I'll present to you, Mr. Yo-Chow Wang, and Mr. Steve Sarley, who will be speaking on the South Florida Water Management Southern Everglades, dealing with the nutrient source control program. So, Mr. Wang?
Thank you, Robert. Good morning. My name is Yo-Chow Wang, and I'm a lead engineer in the Everglades and Estuary Protection Bureau. So today, I will update South Florida Water Management District Southern Everglades Nutrient Source Control Program for the Everglades Protection Area tributary basins. Source controls for this presentation are activities or projects to reduce phosphorus in runoff before it reaches to the stormwater treatment areas or receiving water bodies. A typical example of the source control is the best management practices or BMPs. So this map shows the tributary basins to the Everglades. So this is the Everglades. The green area on the screen discharges to the stormwater treatment areas or STS. On the brown basin shown in the map here, they can discharge to the Everglades directly. This slide depicts how the long-term plan and the restoration strategy supplement the mandatory 1994 Everglades Protection Area by providing funds for additional projects and describing comprehensive strategies. The goal of the 2003 long-term plan is to maintain and improve the water quality benefits of source controls by identifying cost-effective opportunities and working in partnership with landowners and municipalities. Today's update will describe the source control program in the EA and C139 basins, shown here, the orange in the map, which the EA and C139 basin implement and the regulatory source control program of Chapter 4063. And for the other basins shown in the brown in the map, the source controls are implemented and the combination of the regulatory and cooperative effort and ultimately relies on the completion of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan or sub-projects. This table provides the overview of the water year 2021 total phosphorus discharges from the tributary basins. So water year 2021 TP load and TP flow weighted mean concentrations are provided here. The tributary basins are sorted from largest to the smallest based on the TP load. We will provide a quick summary and update for each basin except for C111 basin, which is not part of the long-term plan. And more detail is provided in the 2022 South Florida South Florida Environmental Report, which will be published tomorrow. Let's start with the two largest phosphorus load source basins, the EA and C111 basin, which account for 73% of the total load to the Everglades we observed in the previous slide table. The EA and C111 basin implement similar regulatory source control programs mandated in the Chapter 40E63, which include permit level compliance, which means implementing the nutrient management, water management, particulate matter, and sediment control BMPs. They also have basin level compliance, which is demonstrating the BMP effectiveness by meeting specific TB load reduction. For the EA, the 25% requirement, and for the C111 is maintain the historical level. Research to continue improve BMP effectiveness and supplementary projects as indicated in the 2012 restoration strategy are also part of this program. Starting with the EA basin, the map on the left shows the location of the EA basin, and the chart on the right depicts how the EA basin annual compliance results with the 25% TB load reduction requirement. There are a lot of information on this chart. The pre-BMP line, pre-BMP base period is from water year 1980 to 88, and the TP load after implementing the BMP program are compared with the baseline period. So the blue diamond shows the TP load reduction for each year. And if the blue, and the line horizontal line is 25% TP load reduction requirement. If the blue diamond above the line, the basin is in compliance. If the blue diamond below the line for 3 or more consecutive years, the basin is out of compliance. Since water year 1996, there is only 1 year below the 25% reduction requirement, and the basin is in compliance. So the water year 2021 TB load reduction is 59%. The red line represents the 5-year average TB load reduction, and the long-term reduction is 57%. Stepping into the research and demonstration project, for the EA basin, the Everglades Forever Act requires a comprehensive program of research, field testing, and implementation of BMPs. This research program is conducted by the UF efforts within a 5-year master permit program and sponsored by all the EA landowners. So the BMP field tested in representative sites. This research program also includes outreach and training, and the photo here gives you the flavor of this effort. The EA master permit for the BMP research, testing, and implementation was issued on September 15, 2020. This research is to evaluate and reduce farm phosphorus load in runoff. So six farms for this research program was selected and shown in the map here. We can see the 3 pairs for the total of 6 farms. So the 2021 annual report was completed in July 2021. 6 permit basins were identified as the priority basin in the EA based on the TB load reduction. And except for the East Beach Water Control District, the other 5 basins were selected by the UF efforts as like a voluntary consultation program. So the location for the 5 farms are shown in the map here. Due to the contract management and COVID-19, initiation of this project was delayed. So some initial original tasks were combined, and the final service report was completed in October 2021. The sub-regional source control project is to supplement the existing regulatory best management practices program, BMP program. The objective of the sub-regional source control project is to reduce phosphorus discharge from areas into the eastern flow path, primarily from the S5A subbasin. The approach is to develop strategic solutions by focusing on areas with the greatest potential to reduce the TP through projects that complement what is currently required. Currently, we are evaluating the feasibility of the implementing water quality improvement measures in the East Beach Water Control District. Moving to the Sylvan Basin, the map on the left shows the location of the Sylvan Basin, and the chart depicts the annual compliance result for the Sylvan Basin. As shown in the figure, the bar for each bar represents the measured TP load, and the yellow diamond shows the TP load target. So if the bar below the target, the basin is in compliance. If the bar above the target for 3 consecutive years, the basin is out of compliance. And the red diamond is the TP load limit for each year. So if the bar above the limit for any single year, the basin is out of compliance. I just want to point out in 2018, because we have a lot of high rainfall, the limit is big or is out of scale, is shown here for the 2018. So the basin in compliance since what year? 2010 for the last 12 years. Now I completed the update for the EA and Sylvan basins, and my colleague Steve will continue to provide update for the other tributary basins. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wang. My name's Steve Sarley. I am an engineer with the Everglades and Estuaries program, as well as Yochow. And today I'm going to talk about 5 other basins that are tributary to the Everglades protection area. I'm going to start with the C51 West and Acme Basin. This basin discharged a total TP load of 30 metric tons in water year 2021. And as we can see on the map, this basin is essentially bisected by the C51 West Canal. We have the village of Wellington's Acme Water Control District, which is subdivided into 2 subbasins, Acme Basin A on the north, primarily residential and commercial acreage, Acme Basin B to the south of Pearson Road, which is right there. Acme Basin B is more agricultural and has a significant equestrian presence. And then we have the Pine Tree Water Control District located to the west of the Acme District. North of the canal, north of the C51 West Canal, we have several smaller water control districts that discharge stormwater runoff from the north into the C51 West Canal. We'll first discuss the village of Wellington and its Acme Water Control District, which for our purposes today, I'll generally refer to interchangeably. So if I say Acme or the village of Wellington, I am talking about the same. A little history that until the completion of the Acme Basin B SERP project in 2007, Acme Basin B, the southern subbasin of Acme, discharged directly to the refuge via 2 pump stations that are located near the southwest corner of the basin. With the completion of the SERP project, all discharges from Acme Basin B were diverted to the north into Acme Basin A for eventual discharge into the C51 West Canal. I'm going to start to look at some graphs, and I want to point out quickly that as we look at some of these graphs, excuse me, scales are going to vary from graph to graph. As a rule, when we depict TP load, it's always going to be indicated on the left axis. And when TP concentration then will be indicated on the right axis. Where we're not indicating, when we're not depicting TP load, TP concentration will be indicated on the left axis, and rainfall magnitude will be on the right axis. Some graphs will also include a 5-year rolling average of TP concentration by a dark blue line across the width of the graph. We'll see that in a little bit. So with that, let's look at the historical TP load, which are the light blue bars, and TP concentrations that were discharged from the Acme Basin B directly to the refuge prior to the completion of the SERP project. As we discussed, all these TP loads, except for a small load that occurred in 2013 when the village of Wellington was under emergency flood conditions, were discharged prior to the completion of the diversion project. So since 2007, with that exception of water year 2013, there have been no discharges directly to the refuge from Acme Basin B, and the Acme Basin in general as a whole. This next graph depicts the TP loads, peach bars, and concentrations, which are the green diamonds, discharged from the entire C51 West basin to SDA1 East. Note that since the completion of the SERP diversion project, these values include all the TP loads and concentrations from the Acme Basin. Next, I'm going to move to the L28 basin. This basin discharged a total TP load of 18 metric tons to Water Conservation Area 3A in water year 2021. This basin is primarily agricultural. It's located in portions of Broward, Hendry, and Collier counties. Includes 4 landowners, which includes South Florida Water Management District, the Seminole Tribe, Miccosukee Indian Reservation, and the federal government through the Big Cypress National Preserve. The district owns the C-139 Annex located in the northern panhandle of the basin and leases land in the annex to Southern Gardens Grove, a citrus grower. Environmental resource permit issued to Southern Garden Groves includes requirements for implementation of BMPs. Ultimately, the L28 basin and the feeder canal basin, which we'll discuss next, rely on completion of the Western Everglades Restoration Project. Additional budget and time for this project has recently been approved, and the reinitiation of the project is underway. Okay, now we're going to look at a graph for the L28 basin, and here we go with the TP concentration shown by the red squares and the magnitude of concentration there on the left axis. The right axis indicates the rainfall magnitude, and the 5-year rolling average here is the dark blue line running across the width of the graph. Here we can note the basin's high rainfall of about 63 inches in water year 2021. It's, as you can see, one of the highest annual rainfall amounts for the 24 years of record. Next, we're going to look at the feeder canal basin. This is an agricultural basin in Hendry County. Discharged a total TP load of 16 metric tons to Water Conservation Area 3A in water year 2021. And here we can define 2 subbasins, with the North Feeder subbasin on the right and the West Feeder subbasin on the left. The North Feeder Subbasin, the district continues oversight of BMP implementation, water quality monitoring required by environmental resource permits issued to landowners, has a goal of achieving TP concentrations no greater than 50 parts per billion. These goals and requirements are consistent with commitments established in landowner agreements among the original landowners, the South Florida Water Management District, Seminole Tribe, and the original landowners, South Florida Water Management District, and the Seminole Tribe. There's also 2 ongoing FAV tilling FDAX projects in the North Feeder Subbasin. Landowners in the West Feeder Subbasin can implement BMPs if they enroll in FDAX voluntary BMP program. And as discussed with the L28 basin, the Feeder Canal Basin relies on the completion of the work for achieving long-term goals. So here we'll look at a graph for the Feeder Canal Basin as a whole with TP concentration, red squares, magnitude on the left axis, and rainfall with the blue bars, magnitude on the right axis, and the 5-year rolling average of TP concentration with the dark blue line. Again, here we can note the basin's high rainfall, about 76 inches in water year 2021, second highest, it looks like. Second highest annual rainfall amount for the 24 years of record. We can also look at the North Feeder Subbasin within the overall Feeder Canal Subbasin. Again, concentrations on the left axis and the red squares. Rainfall, light blue bars. 5-year rolling average there, the dark blue line across the width. And of course, the North Feeder Canal, a lot of rainfall also in water year 2021, more than 70 inches. Highest for the period of record there. Next, we're going to move into the C11 West Basin in Broward County. This basin discharged a total TP load of 9 metric tons to the Water Conservation Area 3A in water year 2021. C11 West Basin is pretty much bisected by the C11 West Canal. It covers portions of the western populated portion of Broward County, with about 70% of the acreage urban, the rest agricultural. Water conservation areas 3A and 3B are located just west of the basin. Source controls here include ongoing oversight of BMP and water quality monitoring requirements, including in environmental resource permits issued to the basin's 3 water control districts, which are Indian Trace Drainage District, Central Broward Water Control District, and South Broward Drainage District. Environmental resource permit conditions include requirements for optimized detention of stormwater runoff, as well as public outreach on water quality protection. This basin includes the SERP Broward County Water Preserve Area project, which consists of 2 impoundments and a wetland buffer. Design for the C11 impoundment component was initiated in October 2020. And looking at water quality for the C11 West Basin, again, TP concentrations, the red squares, left axis magnitude, 5-year rolling average, dark blue line, rainfall depicted with the blue bars, and the right axis showing the magnitude. We see the C11 West Basin also, another basin that received rainfall of about 70 inches for the water year, which is pretty significant. It's about 10 inches above the average. TP concentrations for this basin have remained between 13 and 30 parts per billion over the period of record. Our final basin is North Springs Improvement District, or NSID, as we call it. It's our last tributary basin that we'll discuss today. It consists of about 9,000 acres of primarily urban residential development. It's located in the northwest portion of populated Broward County. Borders the Hillsborough Canal to the north in Palm Beach County. Basin discharged only 10 kilograms of total phosphorus during water year 2021.
This basin can discharge directly to Water Conservation Area 2A through the NSID1 structure, which is located here at the southwest corner of the basin. Only that structure can discharge into the Water Conservation Area. Vast majority of discharge from this basin is routed through the L36 north and south. This is the L36 north here, and the L36 south is south of the NSID1. Excuse me. Vast majority of discharge from the L36 north and south is routed to the Hillsborough Canal and the C14 Canal respectively, both of which flow to tide. ERP conditions for this basin include conditions for BMP implementation, water quality monitoring, and should they occur, TP load limits for discharges to Water Conservation Area 2A. Long-term plan for this, goal for this basin is to divert all discharges away from the conservation area by relying on the SERP Hillsborough Site 1 impoundment. Phase 1 of the project is complete. Phase 2 remains on hold as it requires additional congressional authorization. So on this graph for the NSID basin, we return to TP load shown on the left axis, magnitude, and the blue bars depicting TP concentration with magnitude on the right axis. Except for the active TP load there is depicted by the blue bars. I want to make sure I've made that clear. With TP concentration, then the diamonds, the blue diamonds. So you see that except for the active tropical storms and hurricane season of 2018, water year 2018, NSID TP discharge has been minimal since 2000. You can see the high TP concentration in 2018 as well, and that resulted from using a default value for TP concentration resulting from the basin being unable to sample during, I believe it was Hurricane Irma back in 2018. So they missed some sampling events. So the methodology for calculating TP load in that case is based on a default value for TP concentration. And we can see that high value there that we used. We should note that NSID service area continues to expand in terms of development, and water management needs within the basin are still increasing as development continues. So I'm going to summarize what Dr. Wang and I have discussed today. For the EAA basin, water year 2021 TP load reduction is at 59%. With the water year 2021 results, the 26-year average of TP load reduction for the program is 57%. For the C139 basin, water year 2021 remained in compliance, although the target level for phosphorus was exceeded. For the other tributary basins we discussed during water year 2021, voluntary BMP implementation and progress towards the completion of SERP projects continued. And the continued success of and ongoing improvements to the Southern Everglades Source Control Project rely on verifying BMP implementation, continuing the meaningful research, and tracking program performance based on water quality data and specific metrics. And our chapter in the South Florida Environmental Report is Chapter 4, Nutrient Source Control Programs in the Southern Everglades. And Dr. Wang and I, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne and Mr. Sarley. So obviously, we've seen through the course of this presentation, or these presentations, that we are doing a stupendous job of making sure that the water quality, that we're providing the best water quality possible. The next presentation, it's a little more public oriented. There's always questions about how can I get out there and fish and do other activities. So the next presentation is going to be by Mr. James Harbaugh, and he's a recreation planner. He's with Land Resources, and he's going to talk to you in terms of how the public can access these systems. Mr. Harbaugh?
Yeah, move that away from that, talk loud. There we go. Okay, he already mentioned who I am. I am the recreational planner with land stewardship. I just came on last May, so this is my first 9 months with the position, and it has been quite the whirlwind. There's a lot going on here. A little further away. What it probably is, it's probably this feeding back. Nope, all right. Anyways, why have recreation on the STAs? Why do we have public use out there? It is mandated, it's in statute, 373.4592, that we will have recreation on the properties, and that as long as it doesn't interfere with the function of the STA. That's the general gist of it, and the way that we administer that is through the Rule 40E7. That is the rules and regulations and how we can ensure that we aren't interfering and we do have public recreation on the properties. The function of the STA is it's an engineered restoration. So we're not going to be going back to the original pre-settlement types of restoration. It is engineered, so as such, we need to manage it heavily. We're getting the most bang for the buck through the water quality, through these smaller areas. And with that becomes all these other entities that are managing the property. We got Vegetation Management, they're doing plantings. We've seen this multiple times in a lot of different slides. There's a lot of construction going on, and these construction activities tend to dictate where we can and where we cannot have activity on the property for recreation. We have field operations on the property. There's a lot of water control structures, and there's a lot of people working daily on the properties. So we have restricted the public access to the weekends, Friday through Mondays, with most of the work being done by the staff Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So we can't have it open 24/7 because there are so many things going on, and we have, in order to manage it, you have to be on the properties, and public access tends to get in the way of the work being done. We also have other things included, wildlife that are out there. You build these things, they are a wetland, and a lot of wildlife, especially threatened and endangered species, and peril species, find them attractive. So then we will have periodic closings in areas where there would be recreation, but the access would be compromising these species. But the goal is to provide compatible recreation without compromising operation and managed activities. You're going to see that little red bullet there a couple of times throughout the slide. I highlighted this map here. This is SDA1 West. The expansion area is in blue. All of 1 West was essentially closed to recreation because of all the construction. We have the G780 that's been mentioned more than once as well. Despite all this activity in there, we were able to have waterfowl hunting, and we do have some bird watching activities going on in the property as well. So we're trying to accommodate where we can despite all the activities. Necessary closures, I kind of went into this a little bit already. The construction, it's a safety concern. There's deadlines. There's, it's a construction zone. The public is not allowed to be in construction zones in other areas. If you're building a skyscraper or something like that, it's a safety thing. So the public is generally omitted from the area. Then you have post-construction recovery. You can have the vegetation coming in, so access into the cells. If we have people going around in kayaks or fishing, this type of nature into the cell while the vegetation is recovering, then we are going to be undoing the work that is trying to be done. Again, wildlife considerations. These are all different reasons why. Now here's, this is a significant amount of work that's being done in SDA1 East. That's a large area of land that was closed off to recreation, but we were able to have still some in there. This is part of the C-139. This is over at STA 5-6. We have the C-139 being constructed over on the western side, and there's an entrance over there for a trailhead, and we had to reroute the entrance over to Bloomberg Road down to the STA from the north there. So despite, again, even though there is construction, we found another way of making it happen so people can get in there. This is STA 5-6. There is a reroute of the Florida National Scenic Trail that went from, it connects all the way from way south, passes through the tribal properties onto the property here. And without this connection, a lot of the other connections to the whole state would have been lost, and there would have been a lapse in the trail. So we reworked it off of the one canal and put it over into the STA, so now they are able to access. The Florida Trail was really well, worked with them really well. They went out there, signed it. This came from their website, so they have a lot of information out there to make this public, so that the people are aware of what is going on out there, so they can avoid and yet still use it. So who are the people that are going out there? I've kind of mentioned a bunch of them already. I mentioned Florida Trail. Audubon bird watching is an activity that people identify with, whether they're amateur, professional, or just recreationist. The Audubon Society has events on these properties that we authorize them, worked around everything else on the weekends, and it gives opportunity for people who normally wouldn't be able to get into see some of these species of birds. A unique situation in that they're inside of a marsh, which is normally you're on the periphery. To get internal on a giant wetland like this is pretty unique. Recreational clubs, United Waterfowlers of Florida. It's a hunting group. They are very active, working in there to hunt. I guess I'm working with them so they can have access to hunt inside of the STAs. FWC is the entity that regulates all the species, alligators, fishing, and waterfowl, which are all species that are regulated by them. They're another one of our partners that we work closely with to set quotas with. Again, I mentioned Audubon Society. This group here, the South Florida Amateur Astronomers Association. If you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be researching light pollution, I would have told you you're out of your mind. But there are areas that are called dark sky, and this group has a great interest in going out and photographing, observing astronomical events. And we have areas on our properties that there is no light pollution. I would have never thought of something like that, but it's a pretty unique situation. So we provide that access for them as well. What types of recreation? I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but wildlife viewing, a lot of the bird watching, photography is big. We do have shelters, like picnic areas that are usually embedded interior of the STAs, so you can hike to them. You give a destination. If you create a destination, somebody will walk to it. If you put a point on a map and say, hey, let's walk here and see what is there, it can just be a shelter with a picnic table, and they're going to go to it. So we provide those. Hiking. I'm amazed how many hiking trails we have around here, and the STAs provide a stable, safe type of footing for some people who may not necessarily have access to other areas. It is a better walk for some individuals, families, kids, and things of that nature. Biking, we do have bicycling on our STAs. Then you got the hook and gun clubs. Most of these recreations, I'm going to back up here for a second, I'm talking about are going to be taking place on the levee, while some of them are occurring within the STA themselves, in the treatment cells. And most of that's going to be like the hiking and these groups here. Whereas the fishing, it's kind of, you're on the levee, Fishing, we have some areas where we do allow access into the water with a boat or with a water vessel, but most fishing occurs from the levee into the SDA, so it kind of is a blend between the two of them, while hunting is an activity that does occur within the cell itself. We do regulate where they can get in, so it doesn't conflict with the water flows and create short circuits. Here's some the people recreating. Bird watching, like I said, it's a unique opportunity for people that may not necessarily have the ability to get into a marsh deep and see some of these unique birds. Flamingos and SDA2. I like to think that I'm an amateur ornithologist. I do, and a lot of people have bird lists. I actually have one that I don't have written down, but I do have one. Every time I find a new species, I'm excited about it. It is type of I guess when I saw my first flamingos, I was pretty cool. I was ecstatic about it. So other people are the same way. I got the C18 canal. The trail is on there, but without the connection through STA56, they would never be able to get over into this area. So the hiking is in all the STAs, but there's some connections that are important for the national trail. I mentioned the reroute here. This is where most of the STA 5-6, Henry, Glades, Audubon, STA1 is going to be the Everglades, and then Lakeside is going to be Martin County. Lakeside may not be, it's a tributary to the north, but that is, other STAs are significant as well for the birders. Here's the hook and gun I got here. We talked about the quotas a little bit. FWC has a quota, meaning that they have a limited amount of access to provide a better recreational opportunity so that we can, I want to say, limit the amount of people in there, because if we just open this up unfettered, we would have everybody in the world wanting to be there at once. So we have to control the amount of access we have in there so we don't do any damage to the vegetation. We give them points where they can access into the STA. We work closely with FWC to determine where these are before seasons. And then we put that on a map, and then we make that knowledge public, and then the people go out there and hunt, and this is where they access into the STAs. So it's a limiting the access. Some of the other hunting programs we have, the youth hunt, which is the FWC sanctioned activity. It is kind of like a learn to hunt program. Young people who've never been, it's their first year hunting, first year they got their license. They have opportunities to get into some of these areas that other people normally wouldn't be able to get into. We open up some properties that would not be normal public use, just because they haven't been designated as such, and that is a really good program. Recruitment overall is down nationwide with the hunting and fishing, so this is a good way of introducing them, give them a positive experience their first year, and then hopefully we can hook them and we can keep them into the outdoor recreating in that way. Other specialty hunts that we have, the Wounded Warrior Hunt is a military-based that the people coming back from war that have been injured, we're providing them opportunities in areas, again, that normally the public wouldn't be able to have access to, and they have an experience of a lifetime. For many of them, it is the best hunting experience they ever had in their life and may ever have. It's a great volunteer-based program, and the people that have gone through this have just, for some of them, it's changed their lives in some ways, and I'm very proud to be a part of that program. The youth hunt is a federally sanctioned hunt. Again, it's for recruitment, trying to get to keep younger people interested in hunting, and it's a really good program that we got going on. these types of things here, the specialty stuff is important for the future of those type of recreations. More and more people are finding out that the STAs have exceptional fishing opportunities. 3-4, which is up in here. You can't really see it too well with the maps. We've got a big property. We do have limited access in there. And the access that we have in there, we do have motorboat access. And that is going to be in the outflows. So the water's already been treated. And it's going to have no impact upon stirring up the sediments. And these types of areas are accessible, and the fishing can be phenomenal in there. I'm going to mention A1 FEB. It's become a world-class fishery, and it's on a map now. I don't need to put it on here and draw more attention to it, but people have really been drawn to it, and I've had really positive feedback from people who are experiencing that. SDA1 East and 1 West, there are access points there, again, in the non-treatment cells, so it's outside, so we're not interrupting the function of the STA. And I went by there probably a couple weeks ago, early in the morning, and there was already 5-6 vehicles in the parking lot at 1 East. So people are accessing it on the weekends heavily. You know, when we get there, you can see that it's being used. So we built it, they're using it. Growing opportunities. This is just besides the ECP watersheds. We have all these smaller watersheds where other STAs are being built, and there's more opportunities there on the stormwater treatment areas. Lakeside Ranch being one of the more completed ones. It was the pump was just finished. I want to say just last 2021, in August, I believe it was when it was. I might be wrong with that, but it's becoming more and more popular as people are finding it as a hiking and biking destination. It's just outside of Okeechobee. There's a lot of people. It's closer to some of the municipality areas, easier to access, and it's becoming really popular. Nubbin Slough just opened up for recreation. The governing board approved that. So now we're in the process of putting some of the infrastructure in, some of the signage, getting restrooms in place, these types of facilities so that people can use them. When I see Nubbin Slough, I see a really, really good biking trail there. I've seen some, it's a unique experience because on one side you have some of the cattle ranching, and then the other side you have a wetland. You'll get to see some gators and some really cool birds. And it's a nice round, perfect circle, loop for anybody who's got a bike. That'd be a nice bike ride, I would think. I haven't done it yet myself. Other places that are under construction, I'm mentioning these, they're not the ECP because they are significant in size, and they provide recreational opportunities. And C-139 is under construction. There's an FEB there. Opportunities are going to probably present themselves. C-43, that is a giant reservoir in STA. There's going to be a lot of opportunities there. Other opportunities, there's so many different programs going on. I can't mention them all. And I just mentioned the 23, 24, just for sake of putting something in there. And there's just a lot of things coming up and in the future. Phase involvement, what I'm trying to capture here is recreation is considered from the beginning, back to the statute again, because it's mandated, if you will. So when an STA is being designed, we are invited to the table for recreational considerations. What can we do here? Let's kind of get an idea where we would like to put some of the infrastructure, a shelter, public access parking, all the big picture items. We are in the design phase. Then we finally get to put the shovel to the ground and implement the construction, and then how many ever years that takes. The construction is completed, and then there's a testing phase, and then we come back to the table because since the concept of the STA, some time has changed, things have changed. and we revisit what we considered before, and then start talking about how we're going to make that happen and start fine tuning some of the details on that. Then we start talking with some of the kind of staff. We start talking public input from people. It's a lot of planning, a lot of organizing with individuals to make these happen. And then once it's finally all done, the testing is completed. We've got most of the infrastructure in place. Then the governing board gives final approval, and that recreation is allowed on the SGA. Public participation, we want input from the public, and the way we get that is through the governing board meetings, through the rec forum meetings. I have a link here for the all the different meetings that the South Florida Water Management has. And that is where the public has opportunity to voice their opinions and their wants and their needs. I have FWC, their proposed rule changes are yearly as well, because if we have hunting situations or opportunities that we'd like to see expanded or something changed, that's the route that you have to go through with the regulation when it comes to waterfowl, gators, and fishing, since they're the entity that oversees that stuff. That's their opportunity to have their voices heard, and we try to implement them as much as we can, as long as it's compatible with the STAs. And that's what I got. Quick, dirty, and on the way. There's my information, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That completes the presentations of this meeting. We do want to hear from the general public with comments. Again, I reiterate that we are not addressing any specific questions, but we will allow you time, or allow an opportunity for public comments. Here in the auditorium, we have a podium to my right. You can walk up to it and make your public comment. Those of you who are on the phone or on Zoom, you can just raise your hand, and I'll call upon you, and you can have your say. Currently, I'm not showing any panelists, or any public comment requests right now, no hands raised. But I do yield the floor for anyone who wants to have a minute, 2 minutes of public comment within the room. Wow. I guess we've been thorough today, and we've covered all there is to say and all there is to think about. I will, if we have no public comments, we will be at the status that we can adjourn. Currently, we have no public comment, so I think we may be able to end a bit early. I really do thank everyone for coming out. I hope that the information that's been provided is very useful, and it meets your expectation. Obviously, we have a lot of work going on, and we'll continue that work, but I think it's going to benefit the environment as it has been. And so I thank you. And with that,